So again, my name's Julie Davies and I'm the lead radiographer at the Christie at Oldham. So a little bit of background, the Christie, we're now multi-sited with 4 centres, Withington, Oldham, Salford and Macclesfield. We have a catchment area of over 100 square miles and covering a population of 3.2 million. So, I'll get the gist in a minute, sorry. It's just slow to respond, and then it goes. So, pre-SGRT, obviously we've talked about business cases already this morning, and we had exactly the same scenario. And business cases are an absolute nightmare, as I'm sure many of you are aware. So we very much wanted a DIBH solution for our breast patients. And currently we're treating approximately 1,600 breast patients a year, 800 of which were left-sided or IMC, so we wanted to get a solution. We did have, without naming the manufacturer, a spirometer-based technique, but that was only based down at the Withington site, and it was very limited in its resources, so only those with the most need actually got access to it. And even if you lived across the road from a satellite centre, you'd still have to travel for it. So that was quite a big issue for us, that that methodology could not fulfil the need that we had. And then COVID. So the business case was actually making quite good progress. We had lots of meetings, we had all the relevant people engaged, etc. And then COVID hit, everything stopped. There was a total freeze on every business case within the trust, just everything froze. But all of a sudden we were thrown a lifeline, and the lifeline was, if you had a business case that would support biosecurity, they would allow you to push it through. But there were set remits within that you had to sort of provide an answer to that biosecurity. And also we had a time frame. If we gave you the money, you have to implement this very, very quickly. So we looked at our business and case and said, how can we actually make this work? So would SGRT offer improved treatment times, less patient contact, reduction in the spirometer-based, obviously that wasn't great during COVID, and being able to deliver an optimum treatment in the best interests of the patient, but to be available across all our sites so that we were reducing footfall in one position and being able to spread that footfall across all our sites. Very fortunately, we were then allocated the money, but then we had this very, very tight turnaround to provide the answer to the trust, having been then given the money. Sorry, it's probably going to jump 2 in a minute. So here was our timeline for the project. So we literally got the go-ahead and then we had to run. And they said, basically, it wasn't much before October when we got the go-ahead, but we'd already been doing all the pre-work as part of our business case. So we'd already had the communications. But we then said, right, by the beginning of next year, you need to be delivering this. So it was really tight. So the decision was that the Oldham site would be the first of the installs and the first to start delivering the SGRT system and DIBH. So we literally installed and accepted in mid-October of the 20. Withington went in November, Salford went the end of November, and Macclesfield, which is a new build, opened January this year, had their systems installed as they were built. So we then have 7 Align RT systems across the sites. Come next year, that'll increase to 8 with the Salford replacement programme. And we have 4 Gate CT, and I say /SIM RT, because 3 of ours have now been upgraded and changed to SIM RT. So looking at the Oldham timeline, and I will be focusing quite a lot of it on the Oldham, which was the first site to move forward with this. If we look at the timeline of actually getting things in, which I think is, you forget how quickly, in hindsight, we moved, but we still moved in a very efficient and very safe way to deliver it. So literally, we started with install at the beginning of October, and again, I think it's already been mentioned about all the IT connections, the electrical work, the estates coming in, putting extra plugs in, etc., all the way through October. We were training the staff in December, and again, the training was excellent, I have to say that. in that it was very tailor-made for us. We could have had lots of elements within the training, but we knew, because of why we'd been given the money, the deliverable had to be in, and the training was very much tailor-made to what we then had to deliver. And again, you forget, this was at the height of COVID, and I can remember Lorna being there and Elise, and we literally had a room like this, measuring chairs out to be 2 meters apart so that we could sit and train. And in hindsight, you think, my goodness, you forget those things. But that's literally, and each of us had alcohol, and you know, it was a bit of a nightmare, but we delivered that. We did the first use of the SGRT in Free Breathe come January, having done all the work instructions for the quality system. We went DIBH in March, and by May, all our tangent pairs, left-sided, were all doing DIBH. And that was actually the same for all the other sites as well as. So looking at experience and actually attending a few conferences like this before we had the system, I think each of our centres have to go through that process of proving to yourself it's okay to move from one system to another and getting that confidence in the system. So in the first instance, we did like a validation phase, and that also allowed the staff to become familiar with the software and how it worked, ready for then stepping up for the DIBH. So we did a bit of a hybrid technique in the first instance and first group of patients, where we set up the patients in our traditional way, using the origin, moving to ISO and tattoos, etc. And then we looked at the difference between where we were positionally and where the SGRT wanted to take us. And then we moved, as long as it wasn't gross, we then moved to the SGRT position, having got the difference between the two systems, and then we imaged every single patient. So what did that tell us? Basically, there's no difference. If we would have gone with the SGRT, we would have got there a lot quicker and we'd have got in the right place. So looking at our tolerances, everything was there and all the images were in tolerance. Nobody needed correction once we'd moved to the SGRT position. Oh, sorry, it's going to move again, so I'll talk quickly. We used to then also use the different angles. We'd collect the FSD. We looked at the FSDs just to see, was it making any difference? And basically that told us monitoring the full surface negated looking for FSDs. You were wasting your time because the surface actually got you in exactly where you needed to be. And looking at the lung depth as well, everything was very comparable. And actually it was better with the SGRT system than it was using our traditional method. So having done all that, we then went into the next phase. And again, that was great for staff as well, because it allowed them to move on from just moving on from just using it for setup. We were now going to start gating and monitoring the patients throughout treatment. So in this phase, we removed the hybrid approach because we already proved that, you know, we were wasting our time doing that. So we simply used the SGRT and went straight into position. And we imaged the patients daily for this phase. We had 140 images. Only one required correction. And actually that was, I can remember it was borderline, it had MLC. Without that MLC, you would have probably said it was absolutely fine, but there was a slight improvement correcting it, so we did. For standard non-DIBH, comparing the times in setup, knowing it was coming and we had to prove to the trust what we were doing. We'd done the data pre the change and then post the change. So for non-DIBH patients, we were actually getting a time saving of 2 minutes, 14 seconds per patient in setup. So obviously then we wanted to implement the DIBH, which was our ultimate aim in actually doing this. So we had further training and support on site in the scanner and on day one on the Linac. Initially on the Linac, our time slots were increased while we gained that extra experience, but they've, you know, as time progressed, they've actually been brought back in and returned to normal times that we had pre the system. So for non-DIBH patients, we add no times at all for the fact that we're using the system, and we usually add 10 minutes to an appointment for a DIBH patient. Again, thank you to Birmingham. We did the visits pre-COVID, fortunately, and we learned a lot from their experience. And again, we took on their advice about coaching the patients and not making them too anxious. So we do coach and scan on the same day, and we do that without issue. If patients are anxious on day one, we then invest that time in the scanner, because that little bit of investment there actually saves us time further down the line to making sure it's right on the day of treatment. And I say the first patients were treated with DIBH in March, followed by all the other geographical sites. By May, all left-sided tangent pairs would automatically have DIBH, and also further on from that, that also includes 3-fielders and IMC, which came a little later. So far, we've only had 4 patients at the Oldham site who have not been able to do it. 2 of them were in their late 80s, and they were fungating tumours, and it seemed unfair. But saying that, we've actually got an 86-year-old on at the moment, and she quite happily does DIBH. She's quite remarkable. So age is not a factor, but obviously comorbidities could be. We do 2 scans. So we do 2 scans if it doesn't go back. We do a free breathe low dose scan, and then we plan and treat on a breath hold scan. And from Pinnacle, we have skin and free breathe skin, which comes through on the system. So looking at our data again, initially the average time for a DIBH was 16 minutes, 12 seconds. And we have a range from 9 to 25 minutes. Now looking at that data, we had 2 breast cast patients within that data, and they do take slightly longer, and I'll show why they take slightly longer in a moment. So the spirometer-based DIBH, the Withington site gets a 30-minute allocation. So on average, looking at the average, we were actually saving 13 minutes, 48 seconds on that patient. But at Oldham, we had like a seesaw effect, because we were getting all the gains in the quicker setup, but previously we'd never done DIBH. So we sort of tilting back that way. But the difference is the patient is now getting a superior treatment. So, that's what you have to go with, isn't it? In terms of compliance with the SGRT system, it's far better than the spirometer-based. There's far less restrictions. I don't know if anybody's tried that method. I've had a go at it. I find it really difficult because it physically stops you breathing and the patient loses control, and it can be quite frightening. And there's things like if you've got false teeth, you can't get a proper seal on it, some of the age, claustrophobia. There's all sorts of issues with that. But as I say, we've got 86-year-olds doing free breathe at DIBH at the moment. So the difference with this is the patient always takes control. And I think that makes a big difference in them being able to get the advantages of the DIBH system. I think the thing to remember in the times, yes, you have an average, but every patient is an individual. And from our experience, some may take a little bit longer on treatment than others, but that's in the nature. You'd have a standard breast setup before this technology, and some will always take you a bit longer. That's the nature of patients being individuals. And in terms of breath hold, I remember we had somebody who used to be, like a fantastic swimmer and swum for the county and things like that. And we'd deliver the medial, and the gantry would be going over and she was hanging on for the lateral to hold, and I was, please breathe, and she said, it's fine, and please breathe. Whereas other patients just take that little bit longer, and you just have to accept, if you're going to offer it to everybody and let everybody get the advantages, there will be some variation in that. So I did mention the breast cast, which sort of adjusted our timing slightly. So that's looking at patients who obviously have larger mobile breasts and increased skin folds, etc. That can be more of a technical challenge. So for that, we certainly use a thermoplastic cast to help hold the breast in shape and remove some of the problems and try and reduce some of the planned volume. There we go. So basically, you can see here that we're actually using the cast. It fits onto the sequel board, and then they actually do a cutout of the cast so it can see the patient's surface, which then allows us to put the region of interest on, and we can still track the patient. So this was a patient who was actually scanned at one of the other sites, but they know our love for a breast cast, or we've got a staff member who loves a breast cast. So the patient originally had quite a large mammary fold. I don't know if you can see it quite on the first DRR. It's not brilliant quality. And then she came across to us. We did the breast cast on the patient, and we actually got a reduction in 3.2 centimetres on that fold. And with the cast, we were still able to use the SGRT system and track the patient effectively. And this is another example where we've used the cast and used a cutout again to allow the system to work. And here you can see a reduction in cardiac tissue of around 1.8 centimetres by doing that. So here you can see how we've adjusted the ROI to make that work. And basically by doing this, it's allowing us to fit all our current practices into a system and yet still use the new technology. So recently we've had a brand new scanner installed, and with that, when we opened with the newer software of going from the gate CT to the SIM RT. And that has brought us several advantages, as Julie's just described. Very similar. She's done it in far more depth than I'm going to say. But asking the team, they tell me they very much like the active prompts to ensure connectivity between the scanner and the software. We have the second terminal in room, or I think it's termed the patient side. That improves the workflow and the communication with the patient. And Julie's gone into that with far more depth in the last presentation. And very much it allows the tracking of the patient and the setting of a target breath hold. And what they do is they set it so they can align it to the LINAC delivery so that we make sure that we're at the most efficient when the patient gets to treatment. So within the scanner upgrade as well, we've now got the real-time coach in there. So that does help as well. Julie's already been into this, but it helps having that in the room. And it also sort of frees up time on the LINAC. Previously, we didn't have it in the scanner, but then the patient came across it at the point of treatment. So although the staff are quite easily able to explain it, it's what they're already familiar with it. They've seen it before they actually get to the LINAC. But we've also identified a couple of patients who couldn't use it. So, for example, they tell me last week they had a lady who had an eyesight problem, so she needed her glasses on, but then she had a special tint on her glasses, which then reflected off. So actually she struggled to use it. But the point being, I suppose, at that point, it doesn't stop the patient going breath hold. You just have to do it in another way, and you just coach them through it. But all that is defined at the scan, and they will put on the sheet, this patient will not use the RTC. So it stops you reinventing that further down the line in the actual LINAC itself. So the trace is very easy to interpret, amplitude quick and easy to read. All tracking is automatic. It stores in a patient file. And they quite like the fact that the ability to have preset protocols, which they very much want to be using for the 4D scans. So we're currently in our LINAC replacement programme, having replaced our scanner as well at Oldham. So we're currently replacing one LINAC at a time over a period of a year. So in order to do this, we're just approaching our first LINAC coming back on in the next few weeks. We've got a 3-week transition and our second LINAC will go off. But we had to very much look at which categories of patients we could treat during this period to make sure that we could still stay in line with the RCR guidelines. And the breast patients were staying because they are obviously Cat 2. So what we wanted to do is look at our contingencies, which we had to do for everything we did. So our SGRT contingency, what would we do if? So what if we lost the SGRT completely and we weren't able to do it? Well, we could revert back to our old method of setup and just accept the fact that it's just going to take us a little bit longer to get there. But since install in October 20, we've never, ever had prolonged downtime. Touch wood. We do reboots occasionally, and we have an occasional loss of connection, but the occasional loss of connection is more a reflection of our Trust IT systems rather than the Vision system. So in terms of that, we weren't concerned about that because we just don't see issues with it. It's very good. So what if we lost our imaging? So if it was a day one patient, we'd just delay the patient until we got back operational. But prior to replacement, we ran a lot of data on our imaging that we could take forward to our clinical team to give them reassurances. So for a non-DIBH patient, we looked at 1,776 images. Only 3.7% were out of tolerance. It's incredibly low. And then we looked at our DIBH breast patients, which have an even tighter tolerance for delivery of treatment. Nearly 1,500 images were reviewed, and only 1.1% were out of tolerance. So based on that information, our clinical teams were more than happy that if we lost all our imaging but we were still able to treat, they were happy to continue treating while those systems were brought back online. So again, looking at our Oldham patient data from opening, we've done nearly 5,000 non-DIBH fractions using the system. And from the DIBH coming on, which is a little bit behind, we've done over 2,000 fractions. Bearing in mind, we've only been down to 1 Lynette for the last 6 months. That could have been considerably higher, but that's a considerable amount. Trust-wide, obviously over 16,000 patients' fractions have been used with this SGRT system, and over 9,000 in DIBH. So in quite a short period, we have really ramped this up. Moving forward, as I say, in a very, very short period of time, which was the remit of getting the funds to have the equipment installed, DIBH was available to all left-sided breast patients. It's equitable across all sites, and patients now can get treatment closer to home, which is great. Although not currently embarking on tattooless, that's something we very much want to do, and there's been multiple occasions where, you know, the tattoo hasn't taken, patients come in, or some patients have flatly refused them, and it's just not an issue. You don't have to go back to rescan, you don't have to do anything. You just use the SGRT system image and you're there, which gives you the confidence that actually if you didn't tattoo the patient, and I know some sites don't, it would be fine. We're very close to Vision 6, Align RT Advance. That's imminent. Hopefully before the end of the year. Again, down to IT, is causing a slight problem there. We want to utilise the system for other sites as well, because very clearly you can see the advantages on that. So obviously I'd like to acknowledge, you know, no project moves on some people alone, but huge thanks to everybody at the Christie who were involved. It was a massive achievement in a short space of time, especially during the pandemic when, you know, everything was difficult, full stop. Vision RT were actually, they were great. You're not paying me, are you? They didn't buy me a drink or anything, but actually they were a great team to work with. You know, credit where credit's due. They were brilliant and very supportive. The Oldham team, who I'm always very proud of for just taking everything on board and getting on with it, and Kate, who's in the audience, and Craig, who actually sat and crunched those 4,000 images to get that data for me for today. And obviously Birmingham and Guys and Tommy, who were so willing to share their experience to help us on the way. So thank you.
Do we have questions for Julie? Yep. Yeah, lots. Who's first? Go on.
We've currently just had our training over at Preston, and we're installing our systems, and we're at the point where we're going to start writing some of our work instructions and quality documents. The one thing I wanted to ask you was, when you made that step from going from tattoo to ISA centre, and you went straight to ISA centre, was there anything you documented anywhere about just a reference position for the staff to set up to? Because that's something we're just pondering at the minute. Yeah,
if you want to give me your email, I'll happily share any protocols or anything. But I think in doing it that way, the other sites didn't do that phased in. They just followed us and got on with it, which was easier for them, so they didn't have to do that bit in the middle of doing each bit. But I think generally, because the tattoos are still in place, what we say is, and they're on the sequel, you know, so you know where the laser position is. So generally, they just make sure that the tattoos and the lasers align into the patients on the pitch, and then we flick the system on. Does that answer your question? But I'm more than happy to share anything if you want to do that. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, have you any experience yet, maybe doing the breath hold with a deaf patient using the
I'm looking at Kate here. I don't think we've had multi-languages, and we do have hand signalers. So I don't think we've had it with a deaf patient yet, but in terms of a range of languages, we have done that. But that wouldn't stop us by any stretch using it. We'd just bring in an interpreter to do that in the same way we do with a different language or you know, we have had people with learning needs, and I say our age range is considerable. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, with the breast cast patients,
Sorry, I can't. Oh, there, sorry.
did you have trouble sort of giving it enough of a cutout in the cast to have an ROI that you could use with the system, and how did you determine what area you could cut out without compromising the cast?
Yeah, so they did quite a lot of work prior to that. They had somebody on the bed in T-shirts and things looking at how much they actually needed to cut out to do that. So they had a good idea before they started, and obviously the patients were fully involved and willing to go through the process if they know what they're trying to do. So they start with the smallest, knowing that they may have to take it out and go a little bit bigger. So they'll go smaller, put it all in, and then if you can't get an ROI, then they'll aim to go bigger, but still keep, like a mask, isn't it? Still keep that rigid at the point you need it. Yeah. So if you look, you get a really good booklet that you get from the manufacturers that give you the guidance on what you need. But when you do your training, you do accept that in some certain circumstances you have to adapt and change it to be patient specific. So you may have patients with dressings on. Well, you can't use that because the dressing changes every day, doesn't it? So you have to use a region of interest that is specific. Sometimes you have a generic, which you go with all the time, but you are able to adapt it patient specific. Yeah.
Hi Julie, I've just got a question on, so with your images, were they a combination of 2D NV imaging, 2D KV and CBCT?
So that data's 2D, but our breast boosts get XVI, and again it's what you use in the clips in the tumour bed. So it's that data which isn't in here, and again it's very close. So what we would do is we would set up SGRT, we image, and then we auto-correct everything on the XVI, and then you can just recapture the surface in the room on that point, yeah, and then use that as your 0 point, and then you can use that as your 0 point the following day.
So in terms of your contingency plan for those patients that would require daily CBCT, you're still using the same principle that you applied on your 2D?
Yeah, we've also basically, yeah. So if it was a cone beam and we hadn't previously cone beamed the patient, in the event of, let's fingers crossed we've tried to avoid that, and we're nearly there for the replacement on that machine. In terms of that element of it, as long as we'd redone the patient once and we knew it was good, then we would carry on knowing that that was good, and we were in the good place for that patient, and it was reproducible. Generally, after a breast boost, you've been setting them up for 15 fractions prior to that anyway, so you know how reproducible the patient is. But if we hadn't done it on day one, we'd probably delay the patient for 1 day just to allow that to be fixed. Yeah.
Are your electors with the hexapod, so when you're using the SGRT, you're positioning the patient in a 6th off, or are they just standard captures? Is it 6th off?
No. Standard. We have elector Linacs, but we have K-view couches.
just ask, you're talking about your breast patients, do you do the fast forward, the 5 fraction breast?
Yeah, we very much moved to that during COVID. So we were always have been a 15 fraction department historically. We did the the trial with 15-25 start. But with COVID, then we moved very quickly to the majority of our patients having 5 fractions, but we still have a considerable amount due to the diagnosis, etc., that are on 15. But a large percentage are now on 5. So in terms of DIBH, what you find is for the 15 fractions, most people can actually get through a treatment, but when you go into 5 fractions, because it's a longer treatment time, most people will have one stop. A couple need a little bit more than that.
Yeah, the reason I was asking was because of your imaging, saying the clinicians were happy for you to not image on some days because they were happy with the SGRT results.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you
I think for the
fast
DIBH,
forward,
we
they're
would.
having a higher dose, aren't
They are, but looking at 1% being out on it, and when you look at how far they were out, we were looking at a 3 millimetre tolerance here, and if you looked at how far they were out, it wasn't considerable, so they were happy that in the event of. Generally, what would happen, you see, because we have 2 Linacs, if one went down, we just move to the other one. But we can't do that because that currently is the only one. So that would be the scenario, but they were more unhappy on the evidence that we produced that wouldn't be an issue. But if we hadn't started that patient's treatment and we hadn't got any imaging them on at all, then we'd just delay till we got it back on.
Hi, I was just wondering, when all your machines do come up and running, will you move to tattoo-less treatments?
I think that's something that we do need to look at. I think the concern was before, I think some of the concerns, whether they be right or wrong, was about equity across the patch, because at that time, Withington only had 2 systems, Salford only had 1, Macclesfield now have 2. It's about, if we were going to go tattoo-less, making sure we could do it across all sites. So hopefully when we get fully sorted, that should be a conversation that we should be having. But I say on the patients where they haven't had it, tattoos, or a tattoo has gone, as we know happens, can't be visualised, it's just not an issue because the system takes you where you need to be anyway. And there is far less reliance on tattoos using the system anyway.
I wonder, is there another reason why you were using tattoos? Because I've used it without it, so that's why I was just wondering, is there...
Yeah, but I think that was the main thing, because what we didn't want to say is, well, if you're going to be in the same trust, if you go into that hospital, you've got to have a tattoo. And because actually the patients do talk and there are forums, so we need to be consistent in our approach.
Great, well, thank you very much, Julie. That was brilliant.